Okay, so we're going to get started today in AutoCAD discussing a topic that I think is one of the most important things you can possibly learn in AutoCAD. And I also, for some unknown reason, find it to be the least likely to be taught in an AutoCAD class. And I've never quite understood why this is glossed over and is not emphasized a little bit more in the world of AutoCAD. Today we're going to talk about the difference between Modelspace and Paperspace, and then work in Paperspace to create an actual layout. And I was reminded even last Monday, I was looking at the 220 class that was starting to get their elevations ready and whatever, and I was realizing that even now people still don't quite understand it. So I'm going to do my very best to explain how this works and why it's so valuable to work through it. So everything that we've worked on in AutoCAD thus far has been in what's called Modelspace. And in Modelspace, when we see our drawing, it has a black background and has white lines on it. That's how we know we're in Modelspace. There's also a little tab down here. It's behind my head, so it's almost impossible to see, that says Model in the lower left corner of your page. That means we're in Modelspace. And what Modelspace is meant for is drawing things at full scale. So when we drew our house, if a wall was 6 inches thick, we drew it 6 inches. If a wall was 20 feet long, we drew it 20 feet long. So there's no scaling. Everything's full scale when it's in Modelspace. When we switch over into Paperspace, however, it's as if we switched to a sheet of paper. So rather than being everything at full size, as big as it is in the real world, we've switched it down to something that fits on a sheet of paper. And so this is not what your Modelspace. We're going to do this today. Let me hold on a second here. I just wanted to make it fit the screen. I'm going to teach you how to do this today, but essentially what we're doing is we're saying, what if instead of things being drawn full size, we want to scale them down so that they fit on a sheet of paper? That's why it's called Paperspace. It's about a sheet of paper. And so today we have our drawing set up in Modelspace. Hopefully you've gotten to the point where you have your floor plan and your 4 elevations. If you don't have all 4 elevations, you could spend a little bit more time today working on those elevations. But I want to make sure you understand the concept of Paperspace and Modelspace. So we're going to do the layout regardless today of whether or not you're done with all the elevations. So as we get started in this world, we're going to switch from Modelspace into Paperspace, and then we're going to create our page size in the first place. You probably have a tab for Modelspace, and you probably have a tab for Layout 1 and potentially Layout 2 already at the bottom of your page. You can switch to Layout 1 or Layout 2, or you can click the little plus sign for a new layout, and that will give you Layout 3 or Layout 2 or whatever. On any of these layouts, I'll do the brand new one that I just created, Layout 3 here. If you click on that tab, you will see a white sheet of paper. That's representative of the sheet of paper that would print ultimately. And inside of that sheet of paper, you have a what's called a viewport that gives us access to our drawing. These viewports can work independently of each other. We can have multiple viewports on a single page. And we're going to work to set those up. But before we actually get started setting up the viewports, we need to set up the page in the first place. So the default page size isn't necessarily what we ultimately want as our page size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to where it says Layout 3. And again, Layout 3 is for me. You could be on Layout 1 or Layout 2 or Layout 3 or any layout for that matter. I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to go into the Page Setup Manager. And so this Page Setup Manager brings up a Page Setup Manager dialog box. No surprise. There are current page setups for Layout 1, Layout 2, and Layout 3. Since I'm working on Layout 3, I'm going to make sure that's highlighted, which it is by default. And I'm going to click on the Modify tab right next to it. And this brings up something that looks an awful lot like the Print dialog box that we've been using. In fact, it's the same thing. It's just setting it up ahead of time. So if I went from one of these pages and went directly to plot, all of these settings would already be set for me. So we're just setting it up ahead of time such that it's ready to go. So what I'm going to do here is under the printer and plotter name, I'm going to choose, oops, there we go, sorry. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to choose the DWG to PDF. The other AutoCAD PDFs would work fine. I've always had really good luck with the DWG to PDF for whatever reason, so I keep using it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. So There it is, DWG to PDF. That is the printer that I'm going to be using. As I come down here under paper size, I don't want an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. In this class, we're going to work with an ArcD sheet of paper, a 24 by 36. There are actually two ArcDs listed. There's a 36 by 24 and a 24 by 36. It doesn't matter which one you choose because you can correct. If you choose one and it's going the wrong direction, you can choose that you would rather have it in portrait or landscape. It doesn't make any difference. So if you choose the 24 by 36, it's height then width, so it is going to be in landscape. Under plot area, what to plot? You want to plot the entire layout. So we don't choose a window anymore. We've done that window before. We're just picking layout. And under plot scale, we want to make sure that it is scaled to 1:1. So there is no scaling because we're printing the actual size of the page. On the right column here, plot pen table assignments. We're going to use the basic generic AutoCAD CTB, ACAD.CTB. Next thing, under shaded viewport options, I just leave it as normal. You could increase to maximum if you wanted to under quality, but it really doesn't matter. We do want to plot object line weights. We do want to plot with plot styles. And we want to plot Paperspace last. What that means is if you have an object that is drawn on the paper, not in your model space, it will always be on top of the things that are in your model. So let's say you put some text on here. That would show up on top of anything else that's in your model. So generally, that's a good idea to leave that one checked. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and say, OK, this isn't going to actually print it. It's just going to set it up for me. So now this is set up. I can click on Close. And the sheet of paper that I'm seeing here is now 24 by 36 inches. So this is representative of the sheet of paper that's going to come out of the plotter when I actually go to make a physical print. If you were working in a different studio class and you were trying to create certain scale drawings, but you were ultimately going to put them in InDesign and lay out on a poster board, you might not have your page setup set for a 24 by 36. You might use a different size. That's fine. It doesn't matter. The concept is still the same. For this class, we're doing 24 by 36 because it's kind of a generic standard sheet size. And you'll all be able to print to that relatively easily from the plotters at school. OK, so now that I have this layout set for me, it's time to start working and manipulating the viewports. By default, there is a viewport that's created for us whenever we create a new layout. I'm just going to move this up toward the top of the page here. And if I were to double-click inside this viewport and zoom in, we can see that I can actually zoom in and see my floor plan. There's my floor plan. Now, I don't know. I can make this a little bit bigger, too. I don't know what scale that is. It's on the page. It's going to print on the page, but I don't know what scale it is. So in order to specify the actual scale for this drawing, I need to open my properties. And I'll do that by typing properties. And it brings up the properties dialog box here. This dialog box can float, and you can keep it over on one side, and you can kind of minimize it when you don't need it. For our purposes today, I'm actually going to suggest dragging it over to the right side and docking it on the right side so it just stays open. If you're working in AutoCAD, sometimes you don't want that open. But for everything that we're doing today, we're going to be back and forth with the properties menu a lot. So having it docked there on the side is not a bad thing. So to do that, I'll do it one more time. I grabbed it from its sidebar here. I pulled it over to the side of the page until it gave me kind of a ghosted little rectangle. And then I let go, and it docked it to the side. So now that that properties window is showing, I'm going to select my viewport. There's my viewport. And I'm going to look over at my properties. This is the properties for the viewport. And as I come down here, under miscellaneous, we can see that right now the standard scale is set to custom. If I click where it says custom, there's actually a drop-down menu, and I can specify a different scale. So for example, as I start to scroll through these scales, I can see, oh, that's an 1/8 inch equals a foot. That's a 1/16 inch equals a foot. That's a 1/4 inch equals a foot. I know that my drawing should fit at a 1/4 inch equals a foot on this page. So I'm going to go with a 1/4 inch equals a foot. For most of you, that will be the case. You'll be able to use a 1/4 inch equals a foot. If it doesn't fit, or you have multiple stories, i.e. multiple floor plans, first floor, second floor, you might have to shrink the size down. You'll have to see. In which case, go to the next size down, try 3/16. If that doesn't work, try an 1/8. Truth is, 1/4 inch equals a foot is great for a drawing that has a fairly high level of detail to it. If you were drawing something that didn't have a lot of detail in the floor plan, doing a little bit smaller, it'll read just fine. So I've set this viewport at a 1/4 inch equals a foot. Now I need to show the rest of my floor plan. I have two options. I can double click inside my viewport, and I can use the pan command. And I can move this over like that. I'm still not seeing everything. I'm going to double click outside of my viewport. Excuse me. There we go. And I'm going to make my viewport bigger, like that, such that I'm seeing all of my floor plan. Now you have to be careful. If you double click inside your viewport and you accidentally scroll, the scale changes. If we look down here, if I get back and I look at my, my standard scale, it's back set to custom. So what I would recommend doing is once you get your scale set at a 1/4 inch equals a foot, come over here and under Display Locked, set that to Yes, which means even if you double click to get inside your viewport and you go to scroll, you're not going to change the scale of that viewport anymore. I'll show you one other thing that happens and another reason to lock your viewport, and that is that sometimes, I have to unlock it for this to happen, sometimes you're working on your drawing and you say, oh, you know what, I wanted to fix that one thing. And I'm in the viewport, I double click to get in the viewport, and I fix something. Oh great, I'm done. Let me zoom out. Oh wait, where's my paper? I lost it. That's because you're inside the viewport, and I keep scaling out the viewport, so I don't see the paper. I got locked out of my paper. So in that case, I Control Z to undo to get myself back. But if I were to instead lock my viewport, zoom in, double click, oh, I'm working on something, OK, that's good. I zoom out, it's still there. So it's really important to get in the habit of just locking your viewports. And so I wanted to show you that because it does happen where you get in trouble sometimes. OK, so I have my first viewport set up. That's good. It's time for my next viewport. I have a couple different options for doing this. I can click on the Layout tab. On all my tabs that go across here, I can click on the Layout tab. And under the Create View section, thought it was. That's New Layout. They move things around on me. Ah, it's right here. Sorry. It used to be a big button. It's a small button now. I'm going to click on this rectangular viewport right here, and I'm going to draw another viewport. Like that. Again, the scale is independent, so I can double click and I can zoom in on my object. It's always worth kind of zooming in on your building so that you get it close to the scale you're going to want it to be in. And then I'll double click to get outside of the viewport, single click to select the viewport, and I'll come over to standard scale, and I will set that also to be a 1/4 inch equals a foot. Once I'm done with that, I'll move up to the Display Locked and choose Yes. So I have this drawing showing. The south elevation is relatively easy. It's already the correct direction. Now as I move on, I have two options. I could take this viewport, I could copy it and move it over here, or I could go back up to my Layout tab and choose my rectangular viewport one more time and draw another one. So this time, as I zoom in, I want this elevation. Well, it's not going the correct direction this time, so that's a problem. So if I double click to get outside of my viewport, I can actually take the viewport and I can rotate it. So I just typed rotate. I'm going to rotate the viewport, and shockingly, my view rotates as well. Let me move this back so it's on the page, and there it is in its correct orientation. I haven't changed the model at all in Modelspace. It's still on its side. But I am changing the orientation when I get to the Paperspace. So let me select it, and let me go back to my standard scale and make sure it ends up at 1/4 inch equals a foot. There it is. And I'll choose display locked as yes. And it might take a little bit of adjustment there. Yeah, something like that. Looks pretty good. What I'm starting with now is just trying to get all the views in place. I'm not worried about aligning them correctly or getting them set up on the page perfectly. I'm just trying to make sure all my views are there. So once again, I'll go back to the Layout tab. I'll choose Rectangular Viewport. We'll create another one here. I'll double click and zoom in. This is going to be that elevation. Double click, and then single click on the viewport. Set my standard scale to 1/4 inch equals a foot. Display locked will set to yes. Now I'm going to take this viewport and I'm going to rotate it. There it is. And we'll move it so that it's there. Last viewport. I'll come back up to rectangular. I'll draw it. I'll double click to get inside of it. Zoom in on that elevation. Double click. I'll go ahead and rotate this one first. We'll move it down. And this one also needs to be set at 1/4 inch equals a foot. Perfect. So I was now able to set up each one of these such that they have their own viewport and their orientation is correct. They're all standing straight up. Remember, Modelspace hasn't changed at all. That still exists the same way. It's only in Paperspace that I've corrected the orientation. So now that I have these set up, it's time to start aligning them. So a couple things about alignments. Generally, when you set up these kinds of views, it's always important to have them such that they correspond up and down. So this view, for example, I just want to make sure that this corner matches up with that corner. So it looks like I need to move it over slightly so that everything lines up directly below. These views doesn't matter so much because they're all relatively independent, but sometimes it's helpful just to have one edge aligned. So I might move this one over to line up with that edge, and I might move this one over to kind of line up with that edge. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes you want to center them, in which case this one will get moved over a little bit more. Like that. Maybe that's a little too much. Like that. And then I could move the whole thing over a little bit more there. So a couple things that are still problematic, and that is, in these viewports, I have the topography lines cutting through my viewports at these odd angles. That's not a good thing. So we can do something else with each one of these viewports, and that is that we can selectively decide which layers are turned on in a viewport and which layers are turned off in a viewport. So if you had, for example, 2 stories to your building and you drew the first floor on top of the second floor, you can choose in your Paperspace to just show the stuff from the first floor and then just show the stuff from the second floor when you get into Paperspace by turning on and off groups of layers. So let's go ahead and show you how to do that. So I'll start with this first. This is the south elevation down here. I will double click to get inside of that layer. There it is. And then I'll open my layer properties. So I'll click on the layer properties button. And with the layer properties open here, I'm going to look at the topography layer, and I'm going to scroll over on the topography layer until I find this, where is it? Sorry, everything's minimized. It's this one. It's the third one over. It's called VP Freeze. And it's probably just a little tiny thing. So under topography, I'm going to come over to VP Freeze, and I'm going to click that icon. And when I do that, you see that the topography goes away just in that viewport. It hasn't gone away in any of the other viewports. Now I can switch into this viewport and again click on VP Freeze, and it goes away. Same thing in this viewport, VP freeze. Same thing in this viewport, VP freeze. And so now I don't have the topography showing in any of those other views. I do, however, have it showing here. Somehow my doors in this got set for phantom lines, and they shouldn't be. So let me change the line type here to continuous. And the topography should have been set as phantom. That was a mistake on my part. OK, so I now have my floor plan, and I have all of my elevations. I'm going to do a test print and see what it looks like. And it's always worth doing that. So I'll click on plot. This batch plot thing will pop up. If you had lots of different viewports and you wanted to plot them all at once, you could do that. For your purposes, you're almost never going to do this. So just say continue to plot a single sheet. And remember, all of the options here were preset. So we're good to go. We just need to say OK and choose where to save it. I'm going to put it on the desktop for right now. And here it is once it's gone ahead and printed. So once you've printed it like this, it's always worth kind of taking a look at how did it turn out. So it looks like some of my blocks here don't look the best. It looks like the line weights didn't get applied correctly, or there's duplicate lines. So they may need a little bit of correction. As I look at my buildings, OK, they don't look too bad. Showing up OK. In these views, if you have other line types like phantom lines or hidden lines, which I do, they should show up. So for example, there's a set of hidden lines. Those dashed lines should show up when we get into this viewport. Looks like I need a little bit more on my line weights on some of the elevations. Let me hit Control- and look at this again. There's one other big problem with this page, and that is that I'm seeing all of the viewports, which are really rather ugly. So I'd like to get rid of those viewports and make them not seen anymore. So let me close this for now. And I'm going to do that by creating a new layer. And actually, I might already have a layer for this. Nope, I don't have one. I'm going to create a brand new layer. And I'm going to call that new layer No Print. And it's very common for me in AutoCAD to always have a no print layer. I'll make that the current layer. I'll make sure that it's set to not print. So I'll click the little printer icon next to the no print layer. And for me, no print layers are always green. I have no idea why, but mentally I associate all of my green stuff as not going to print. So with that no print layer created, I will take every one of the viewports like that, and I'll move all of them onto the no print layer. So they show up with green borders. It doesn't mean that the content in the viewport won't print. It just means that the viewport itself isn't going to print. So at this point, I'll go back to plot. We'll say OK. We'll replace it. And there it is, open. And now you can see that it doesn't have those borders anymore, which can make a big difference on your overall drawing. Looks like this elevation probably needs to come down just a little bit. The spacing isn't quite right. The other thing that I noticed is that my line type for this line right here isn't correct. That should be the same phantom line as the rest of the topo lines. So I need to fix that as well. So I'll come back here. This time I'm going to flip over into Modelspace. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to make this line match this line. So I'm going to use a command called match prop. It's also right here under Match Properties in your Properties section of your Home ribbon. And when I click on it, it says Select Source Object. So that would be my source object. Select Target or Destination Object. It would be this object right there. This line then is going to match that line. And it works rather nice to set it up that way. So I can go back to my Paperspace. And we could see that the line is now the correct line type. OK? I'm going to go back and also correct some of these blocks. They're on the furniture layer. Let me look at the layer properties for the furniture layer. Let's make all of them gray, so they're not so overpowering. And let's go ahead and replot layout 3. Oh, sorry, it was open. Got to close that, then we can print it again. There you go. Looks like I may need to do a little bit more work. Those line weights aren't quite showing up the way that I want them to. But that's the nature of it. So now that I have my view set up, this is what you're going to be working with today. This is where I want you to get. You don't need to add things like text yet, dimensions, title blocks, any of that. Next class, we're going to talk all about that part of it. Today is about understanding the difference between Paperspace and Modelspace, making sure you can get the viewport set up, making sure you can get the scale set up. But when we go to print, or when we go to post this on the course website, we do need a JPEG still to show this. This is currently a PDF, which is what you will normally be creating. But since we have it as a PDF, if we go ahead and open Adobe Illustrator, Illustrator can natively read PDFs, especially AutoCAD PDFs. So if I open up Illustrator, once it's open, I can go ahead and go to File and then Open, and I can open that PDF that I created that was on the desktop. There it is. Let me press Control-0. Adobe reads this sideways. I'll tell you how to correct that next class. But to create the JPEG so that you have that, you can just go to File and then Export and Export As. And we'll choose JPEG. And again, I can put this on the desktop and say Export. This will then create a JPEG for us. Do change your screen resolution to 300. And then go ahead and say OK. And then you can post that file. I'm not worried if the orientation isn't correct. For our purposes today, we'll get into Illustrator, we'll get into collaging with Illustrator and how to fix things in Illustrator next class. But for our purposes today, so that you can get a JPEG to post, that would be the way to do it, because you've already done the work of creating the layout. There's no reason to change once you've created the layout. So that's the difference between Paperspace and Modelspace, and that's how to set up your drawing with scales. That's our goal today. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you have extra time, finish up what you haven't finished up. Next class, we will take all of this into Illustrator. We'll do the collage. We'll do the finishing touches to create our floor plan. We'll do title blocks and notes and that sort of thing. And I'll show you how to do all of that. And that's pretty much going to wrap up our AutoCAD little segment. And we're going to move from that into SketchUp. So it's time to start wrapping it up. Use the rest of your time today to get all those line weights set to really get a nice, beautiful drawing. Any questions? All right.